statement has just been issued now by the State Department from Secretary of State Cordell Hull. It runs as follows. On November 26th, the Secretary of State handed to the Japanese representatives a document which stated the principles which govern the policies of the government of the United States toward the situation in the Far East, and setting forth principles for a comprehensive, peaceful settlement. At 1 p.m. today, this State Department statement continues, the Japanese ambassador asked for an appointment for the Japanese representatives to see the Secretary of State. The appointment was made for 1:45 p.m. The Japanese representatives arrived at 2:05 p.m. They were received by the Secretary of State at 2:20. The Japanese ambassador handed to the Secretary of State what was understood to be a reply to the American document of November 26th. Secretary of State Hull carefully read the statement presented by the Japanese representatives and immediately turned to the Japanese ambassador and with the greatest indignation said, "I must say in all my conversations with you, the Japanese ambassador," and this is Secretary Hull speaking, "I must say in all my conversations with you during the last 9 months, I have never uttered one word of untruth." Then Mr. Hull, referring to the Japanese note just handed to him, continued, "In all my 50 years of public service, I have never seen a document that was so crowded with infamous distortions and falsehoods on a scale so huge that I never imagined any government on this planet was capable of uttering them." The contents of the Japanese note is not given. Apparently it follows the example set by Hitler in the case of his own aggressions, in which he charges the victim of aggression with all sorts of faults. And now we have word that Secretary of War Stimson has just issued an order to all military personnel in Washington and throughout the country to report for work Monday in uniform. Then from the White House comes word that the Army has received news of signals of distress believed to come from an Army cargo boat 700 miles west of San Francisco. Presumably, this is another ship. Previously, we had word from the White House that an Army transport carrying lumber was torpedoed 1,300 miles west of San Francisco. Now here are some of the first comments that we have gathered from congressmen. Veteran Senator Glass of Virginia says, "I suppose that this means war." And ironically, he added, "Of course, we're not going to surrender immediately without any effort to repel the attack." Senator Charles McNary, the Republican leader of the Senate, said, "I am amazed at Japan. I thought they had better judgment. I deeply regret the turn of events. Now the nation must unite in giving her a beating for her stupidity and aggression." That was from Senator McNary. Senator Hill, the Democratic whip of the Senate, says this, "The United States ought to use every means, every power to lick the Japanese, to lick them thoroughly and completely, and to do the job in the quickest possible time."
I spoke to a woman who lived next to a Baptist chapel that had been hit. She was buried under the wreckage of her completely demolished house. She was suffering badly from shock.
The first thing I knew was dust started to fall on me. The floor gave way, and I immediately realized what was happening. The roof came down. I covered my head with my hands and wondered, frankly, whether this was the end.
Report to their ships or stations immediately. Washington is expected to blossom out tomorrow as a city of uniforms because huge numbers of officers have been pouring into the city for months to perform the Army's overhead functions. Early said that so far as the President's information went, attacks were still in progress at Manila and in Hawaii. That is, of course, Stephen Early, Presidential Press Secretary. In other words, he said, we don't know that the Japanese have bombed and left. He went on to say, as soon as the information of the attacks on Manila and Hawaii was received by the War and Navy departments, it was flashed immediately to the President at the White House. Thereupon, and immediately, the President directed the Army and the Navy to execute all previously prepared orders looking to the defense of the United States. The President is now with the Secretaries of Navy and War, and steps are being taken to advise the congressional leaders. Also, we received a report earlier from Washington that any news of the Far Eastern developments would have to come from the White House. Navy officials, when queried for news, made that statement. Congressional leaders immediately were advised of the crisis, too. Attachés of the Japanese embassy began burning secret documents in the embassy yard. The group of newspaper reporters and photographers stood by, watching. And after a few minutes, they were ordered to leave. The embassy doors were closed. There was no disorder. Columbia, of course, will interrupt any of its regularly scheduled programs to bring you bulletins and important developments on the news from the Far East as it develops in Washington, and as we receive reports from our correspondents, the press associations, and affiliated stations in the from the danger zone. W.L. Shira will be on the air at 5:45 over most of these stations. John Daly speaking.
This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
WCCO Minneapolis. The United Press announces that it is ordering into operation on a 24-hour schedule all of its leased wire circuits throughout the country. The order was given to the American Telephone and Telegraph Company shortly after 2 p.m. to see that all newspaper and radio clients of the United Press, regardless of their normal hours of service, were hooked into the UP wire system immediately for continuing service until further notice. Now we take you back to the symphony concert by the New York Philharmonic Symphony Society.